Recently, I was working with a buyer who was involved in a transaction where the seller was not always doing the things that he had committed to do. And the buyer asked me legally, do they have any recourse? Can they delay settlement? So I thought I should speak briefly on what the scenarios are that allow a buyer to delay settlement. One category is whether the seller has left a whole bunch of things sitting around the property. The standard agreement of sale states that anything that is not attached to the house, like a bookcase that's bolted to the wall or something that's built in, unless otherwise agreed to between the buyer and the seller, needs to be removed. A lot of times things like basement work tables or pool tables that are in basements because they're heavy and difficult to move just get left there. If the buyer and seller have not agreed contractually for those non-attached things to stay, then the buyer has the right to hold up settlement until the seller gets rid of those things. So the language in the agreement says it must be free of debris and broom swept clean, which brings me to my next point. Clean. That does not mean the property needs to have been cleaned, as in the floors washed or the bathrooms cleaned or the oven cleaned out. A lot of people think that a seller is required to clean the house, and that's not true. They don't have to, but they can't leave things sitting around that you could pick up off the floor. It's supposed to be broom swept clean. Similar to what I mentioned about a pool table or a work table, there are inclusions and exclusions. There's a section for that on the agreement of sale. And if the seller either left something that was expressly excluded or was excluded due to the boilerplate language, or they took something away that was not specifically excluded, that can be another reason that a buyer can hold up a settlement. For example, I had a scenario where a buyer bought a place and the chandelier in the dining room table was missing the day that we did the walkthrough. And when I contacted the agent, she said, oh, that was a very special fixture and this is how much they paid for it and all of this stuff. But it didn't matter. It had not been excluded in the contract. So we needed to work out what should happen. There was a possibility of the seller providing a monetary amount so that the buyer could get a new fixture. The buyer didn't want to have to deal with it. They didn't want to have to shop for it. They didn't want to have to worry that the amount that was given wouldn't buy them an equivalent fixture, so they demanded that the fixture be returned, which it was. If there has been an inspection, and as a result, the negotiation has been that the seller will repair or replace something, that needs to have been done, or the buyer has the right to hold up settlement. For example, if there was a leaking pipe and the seller didn't have it repaired and the buyer discovers at the walkthrough that the pipe is still leaking, the buyer can say, I'm not settling until this gets fixed. And you might say, well, why are they going to worry about such a petty thing? The problem is that once settlement occurs, the buyer has absolutely no leverage over the seller. The seller has all their money, doesn't have to answer their calls, doesn't have to do anything. So it really depends on how the transaction has gone. Often, buyers won't hold up settlement, but they'll have a gentleman's agreement, or sometimes have to have a lawyer come in and write something up that both parties sign, depending on how much everybody trusts each other. But the buyers may be within their rights to hold up settlement. Similar to the leaky pipe that I was just talking about in regards to an inspection, even if there was no inspection done, or if everything had been repaired, if there is something that is newly defective about the house, let's say all of a sudden there's now a leak in the roof, or something happened and a window pane was broken. Any change in condition, any negative change in condition other than normal wear and tear that happens between the time that the buyer and seller sign the contract to settlement is the seller's responsibility to repair. So there's not a cut and dried list of situations in which the buyer can hold up settlement. It's a bit of a gray area, but those are some of the guidelines that you could think about if you are curious about if a buyer might be able to hold up settlement.